Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Arguments about things that are going to happen in the future, such as automation, have been really prominent in the UBI movement in the last 5 or 10 years or so. I think you're all familiar with the argument that we are automating away jobs at such a rapid pace that soon there will be very little demand for unemployment. There'll be massive unemployment, and then UBI comes essential and perhaps inevitable. And this, although this argument has attracted lots and lots of people into the UBI movement, I'm very leery about it. I think it is the wrong way to talk about automation and UBI, to base an argument on a UBI about something that is supposed to happen in the future, to prevent what's going to happen in the future, to deal with this thing that is going to happen in the future. I'm going to argue here that the case for UBI, even the case based on automation, needs to be based on the past injustice and the present situation. What's wrong with this future-based argument are several things. One is that it sounds crazy. It's not crazy, but it sounds crazy. We have had tens of thousands of years of technical innovation, and technical innovation has always meant more jobs in the long run for more people. At the beginning of the United States Republic in the 1870s, over 90% of the US citizens were farmers or worked on farms or were family members who lived on farms. 90% of the population. Those jobs were automated away. Now, less than 1% of the US population is less than 1% of the US population lives or works on farms. And yet they produce far more food and can even export food. All of those jobs have been automated away, but it did not cause massive unemployment. People moved to other jobs. So it sounds crazy to people to say, well, this next round of automation, that is the one that's going to, that these jobs will be irreplaceable. I don't think this argument is crazy. I think it sounds crazy to a lot of people. It's not crazy, because just because something has always happened doesn't mean that it always will happen. For thousands of years, automation meant more jobs for beasts of burden. There were always, no matter what technical innovation we came up with, there were more jobs for horses, more jobs for oxen, more jobs for camels. Then one day, somebody invented the steam engine, the electric motor, and then the internal combustion engine. And the demand for beasts of burden collapsed in a very short time. I've read that the number of horses in Manhattan peaked in 1910. And by 1920, 10 years later, there was hardly a horse to be found in Manhattan, except for police horses and hansom cabs and a few people who were real holdouts to that horse. So it can happen. Now, some people might argue, well, humans aren't horses. Humans can do so much more than horses can do. What you've done to the horse, you can never do the human, because they've got ingenuity and all this stuff. Well, the thing is, the horse could have made that same argument. They could say, oh yeah, the horse could have said stone tools. Yeah, stone tools were automated away when we got steel and other kinds of tools. But that could never happen to the horse, because the horse is so much more than a stone tool. We don't know what AI can do, and maybe it can do all or most of the things that humans do. Now, of course, automation does not completely replace the horse. There's horse racing, and there's hansom cabs and a bit, but there's very few use of horses really as a beast of burden. That's using a horse as an ornament. We are something for aesthetically pleasing. We haven't automated that away, but the number of horses with jobs in the world is collapsed, and it's not coming back, at least, well, unless there's a real economic collapse. And an argument that people will make, another argument that people, other than just humans being more complex than horses, is that this argument from comparative advantage theory. This is an old economics argument that has its roots in Adam Smith, but it's actually he was unable to talk about comparative advantage. It was David Ricardo, one of Adam Smith's successors, who came up with the idea that you don't have to be better than one nation, doesn't have to be better than the other nations in an absolute sense. It just needs to have something that it does relatively well. An example could be used that say say that some person was not only an excellent manager, but also the world's fastest typist. But if they could manage a big, huge firm, you wouldn't have them also doing typing. Even if somebody was less at typing, they'd want to do the typing to free this excellent manager to manage this firm. And that's comparative advantage. And supposedly, this is to say that all factors of production will always be employed. But the problem is that human beings aren't exactly like a raw factor of production, because human beings are actually more like a machine tool. It is that we manufacture human beings by giving them food, shelter, and clothing, and keeping them alive at the expense of these things. It is really the cost of humans is fixed by the cost of keeping us alive. And it is not always true that a human being will have a comparative advantage when you think of, should we spend these resources to humans when we could take these to keep humans working, when we could spend these resources to build more automated robotics AI things. These resources could be used. Humans don't necessarily have that advantage. It's the resources themselves. We'll be using the land and the minerals and so forth that we use to create humans. We'd be using those things. Those basic resources will have their comparative advantage, but that doesn't mean the machine tool that is human labor will have a comparative advantage. So it could happen, and that's, the horse is a really good example. We used to use lots of land to keep horses alive and to pasture them and feed them, and we no longer find it worthwhile. Where is the horse's comparative advantage? That could happen to human beings. But so it's not crazy. It is something that could happen, but I'm very leery about basing a central argument for UBI on something that could happen. Because look at all the argumentation I had to do just to say that this argument is not crazy. And it's for some people, it immediately says, yeah, I see this is happening. I think it's happening soon. This really excites me about changing the labor market to keep people alive when there are no jobs for them. But I took all this argumentation to say it's not crazy, and some people will strike some people as crazy and strike other people as intuitive that this is on the way. And those that it strikes as crazy, it's going to turn them off. But all of this argument to say this, it only says that it's not crazy. It does not, the argument I've given you does not prove that it's happening now. And it's not, it doesn't prove that it will happen. So even if it's possible for automation to replace virtually all human labor, it might not happen anytime soon, even if it's going to happen. Yeah, there's a lot of people predicting that it's about to happen, but they could be wrong. They could be off by a century or two or a millennium. We don't know. It might not happen so soon, as might is not enough to give an argument for UBI right now. Also, basing your argument on this risks discrediting the movement. Imagine you had in 1800, you had correctly predicted the future automation of farm labor in the United States. And you predicted that we go down from 90% to 1% farmers. You might not have envisioned that we were also going to invent all kinds of other things that would give people new jobs. You might have predicted back then that when farm labor is automated away, there will be no jobs. And you would have been wrong. And we don't know that the new round is going to create more. It was going to create more jobs, less jobs in the long run. We don't know. And a lot of people in the past have made this claim mistakenly. Well, famously, John Maynard Keynes, the greatest economist of the 20th century in the 1920s, gave a series of lectures called The Economic Possibilities of Our Grandchildren, where he argued that if you look at the pace that economic growth is happening in a generation or two, we're only going to have to work a few hours a week in order to produce everything we need. But still today, we're making the working class and the middle class work 40, 50 hours a week, including, well, it varies by country, but including commuting time. It can be very long in a lot of places. And then a lot of people, I think, who are making this automation argument now during this, what I call the third wave of support that UBI is having for the last 10 years or so. A lot of people who are making that argument are unaware that automation was a serious driver of the second wave of support for guaranteed income that happened in the 1960s and 1970s, led by Robert Theobald and some other futurists who were saying, look, we've got these computers. These computers are going to replace human labor, and we've got to do something about this now. We need to introduce some form of guaranteed income, such as a basic income. Well, that was in the 1960s, and they're actually the level, the labor force participation in the United States 60 years later is actually higher now than it was then. So even if they were right in the long run, they were really wrong in the short run. And it kind of looks bad. We're given the same argument that we were 60 years ago that this is about to happen. It appears weak, even if this time we're right. And also, even if it is true, even if it is true that automation will eventually replace human labor, and even if it is true that it's going to happen actually pretty quick, which might happen, I don't know, it still gives ammunition to the opposition to UBI, because they can say, okay, well, someday we'll need UBI. Someday when all this automation happens, we're going to need UBI. All right, when your crazy automation story comes true, then we can try your crazy new policy. Until then, let's not do anything. We don't need it now. We still have jobs. And the problem is, the only real proof that it is happening is when it does happen. There's really no way to prove what is going to happen next in the future. The future is inherently unpredictable. We'll know it when we see it, but who knows when that will be. But to say all this doesn't mean that I think that automation should be absent from the UBI debate. But the way to make, I think, a stronger argument, I don't know if it's rhetorically more powerful, but logically stronger, is to connect automation and economic growth that accompanies it, and happens for many reasons, to the past and to the present. We need past and present-based arguments to change the future, not future best how the future is going to change, and so we're going to adapt to it before it gets there, but based on what has happened so far. And automation has a big role in that, because even if it's true that automation produces more output for everyone, that doesn't mean that is good for everyone. There's a total automation, because of automation and other forms of economic growth, or other sources of economic growth. We produce more goods, so theoretically everyone could have more. But people often make the jump saying, if there's more for everyone, then everyone must have more. And that's very often not true. That's called the fallacy of composition, saying what's true for the average person is true for every person. It's not true. And as a matter of fact, automation disrupts people's lives in ways that often that generation of people, the people whose lives were disrupted, never recover. It is cruel. The way we handle it is cruel. You've built up your skills. You are a textile weaver in the early 1800s in Britain when that was automated. You joined the Luddite movement, not because you were against technology, because you were against a system that said, sorry, you built these skills up your whole life. Now you've got to go to the city and see if somebody will hire you as a domestic servant or something like that for room and board. And you go down to the bottom. Maybe your children recover, maybe your grandchildren recover. Somebody gets a share of that new created wealth when we have to use fewer inputs to get a given amount of output, but it's not necessarily you. That puts workers and families through enormous trauma when you put them down to the lowest end of the labor market. When you look at how low the living standards are at the bottom end of our labor markets. The Luddites were not against technology. They were against the loss of their livelihood. And if you could find some way to let them keep their livelihood with new technology, they'd been all for it. On automation, now another present-based argument is that automation, whatever else it is doing, it is disrupting the labor market at an increasing pace right now. Many jobs are being replaced by technology. Even if new jobs are coming along, the number of people who go through this cruel, traumatic drop in, you told me, go to school, learn this trade, do this, build up a career, and then it's gone. And then you take all that away. And I did everything right, now I'm at the bottom again. The number of people going through that has been increasing. But another past-based argument is that most of us have shared in the burdens of creating the economic growth that we've had over recent decades. But most of us have not shared the benefits that have accrued over the last few years. U.S. GDP doubled between about 1980 and the present, about 40 years, a doubling of economic output in the United States. Yet, a minimum wage worker in the United States makes less in real terms now than they did in 1955. That's 67 years ago. And at that time, going back even that far, our economy had less than 1/3 the productive capacity that it does now. And the story in Europe is really not very much different. Most of the gains that have come from the last 40, 50, 60 years of automation and economic growth have gone to the top 1 or 2% of people. And the rest of us are about where our families were on average 40, 50 years ago. Some of us, the people at the lowest end, are very often lower as we've gutted social programs and so forth. Yet, we're all, not only have we worked to help produce this economic growth, we and our parents and grandparents have all worked to help produce these things, but also we are bearing the enormous environmental cost that we've had that accompanying all of this economic growth. Imagine if our incomes and our available options had kept pace with economic growth. Say, compared to somebody in the late 1940s when economic output was about 1/4 of it is now. So we could all be working 1/4 of what we were in the 1940s and consuming the same. Or we could be working the same and consuming 4 times as much. And if our options had increased, we would be able to choose that. We would be able to work a 10-hour work week and get enough to live at a modest level. Full-time workers in the United States in the late 1940s had houses, they had food, they had transportation that would get them to work, to get all of them, and to see their friends and so forth. You can't, not many people can do that on a 10-hour-a-week salary. Where did all those options go? Well, I know a guy who launched his car into space. That's one option we can do it. I don't know him personally, but you know, I'm just telling you what I heard. And a lot of people will just say, well, that's the market. The market does these things. That's just how, you know, and sometimes things change in the market. It is not just the market. It is changes in the rules. We've changed the rules to be very unfavorable to the leverage of low-income people to command a decent share of what we produce and the economic growth that we've all helped create. The leverage of workers is really low. That needs to be redressed. So I've given 3 automation-based arguments for UBI. None of them is about what might happen in the future. All of them are about what's happening now in the present or what has happened in the past. I believe it's essential to recognize that UBI is not something we might need someday. UBI is long overdue, perhaps hundreds of years overdue, since we enclosed the commons and we had a colonial movement that took access to natural resources from almost everyone around the world and made them wage laborers to the people who own the resources, the capital that we make out of resources. It is long overdue. We need it now. We need UBI to protect the 99% of people from the disruptions caused by automation, whether or not that automation is going to eventually lead to a big decline in jobs or not. We need it to counteract the imbalance of power that automation and rules changes have created. And we need it to help just about everybody get their share of the benefits of automation. And we need it to be part of a plan to restore the environmental damage that we've been doing to the earth that sustains us. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Karl. And now I would like to hand the floor, actually, do we have something like that? To Mr. Peksa for first comments. And while he does it, I encourage, of course, everybody in this room, in our Zoom meeting, and also those people who follow us on the stream, also to ask questions in the chat, in the comments, and yes.
So first of all, thank you very much, Professor, for a very passionate presentation. I really appreciate it. And I mean, like talking as a chairperson of the European Pirate Party, I mean, like I really appreciate this discussion about like UBI, because this is a topic which brought our attention for quite some years. We spent a lot of time discussing that, and we do really enjoy it. So of course, I mean, like it's not an easy topic, and I understand, or I do know that there are a lot of arguments in favor and also against. I mean, like I do prefer to talk more like optimistically. So I would maybe a little bit go in the direction. Let's talk about how to do that, and let's talk about the problems rather than repeating all the arguments in favor, because that would be probably a waste of your time. So maybe just like two big topics which arouse in my mind, and I think should be like important in this context. I mean, first of all, regarding the automation. I mean, like we have no such a thing like a universal AI. I mean, like there is no such thing like a commandant data from the Star Trek to actually to be something like independent person that would be really able to not only just to solve working tasks, but or really like to be able to do abstract thinking about all sorts of human activities. I mean, like we have tools, for example, to make you older. I mean, like you can see that on Instagram photo filters, like that's the AI. We have maybe tools to actually search, like search engines, and what the Google does, like searching hyperlinks. Maybe we could have something like automated cars, something like a car that is driving. However, we have no like universal agent that would completely like replace the man. I mean, like when the cars get broken or has an accident, there is it can't resolve the situation to talk to the police officer and to explain what happened, and then talk to the insurance company to apply for remuneration and so on. So I mean, like we are far from that, and that means that we are still like having like more simplified things. I mean, like the AI we currently have is not really like smarter than very stupid animal. I mean, nothing against the insects, but I mean, like it's as stupid as any insect. So my question would be, I mean, like, don't we actually need the people still working in those, let's say, positions when they are no more like doing the actual job, but being something like a, I would say, shepherd or like a director or commander for the bots or robots we are actually creating? I mean, like, I think that we are currently, at least when speaking about this period of time, we are very much in this phase. That will be one of the questions regarding the automation, and maybe a second one, which would be even more political. What we do see when it comes to the automation, it's very much the question of data. I mean, like, the artificial intelligence, in order to be trained and deploy, it is very much reliant on like having a huge data sets, which work to be trained. I mean, like, do you want a face recognition software? Then you need a lot of faces to actually like be based for this automation. So what's the problem? I mean, the problem is that only like the biggest companies or maybe the states, they have the access to the data sets, which at the end of the day results into the situation that the artificial intelligence or the automation is quite like concentrated industry. Should I talk about like who are the major players? You effectively find like 4 big major players in the US and maybe 3 big major players in China. It's more or less everything. I mean, like, then there are some small companies, startups and so on, but it's not really like the field is quite like dominated by the big players. So my question is, when we are actually talking about the automation, it very much kind of like concentrates the power in the hands of like few companies, and also it concentrates it geographically to some like particular states in this world. So my question would be, when we are talking about like this replacement, don't we actually need something to actually equilibrate this sort of like imbalance which appears already in the, let's say, international order and becomes more and more important? I mean, it's not completely contradicting, but I would love to see or hear your thoughts on that.
Okay. Well, a few things in response to that is that, yes, today we still need labor. We need people to do lots and lots of things today. But when you think of how many jobs out there really need to be done, I mean, beyond David Graeber's idea of bullshit jobs, jobs that are counterproductive or useless, there are a bunch of other jobs that are really optional. When you think about if we all had a work responsibility that was just to do the things that really needed to be done, the healthcare, the childcare, the food, essential services, some forms of transportation. If you look at the things that really need to be done, a tiny amount of our economic productivity is devoted to that. And we don't have any statistics on it. We have no statistics on what are necessities and what are luxuries and other things like that. And so we need some labor, but we don't necessarily need all the labor we have. And that's something that Keynes recognized when he was talking about this 100 years ago. He didn't say all the jobs are going to be replaced. He talked about opportunities. We as a society have an opportunity to all work a lot less and still get our needs met. But very few of us, except some of the people with very specialized skills, very specialized and in-demand skills, or people who are independently wealthy, very few of us actually have the opportunity to say, yeah, I only want to work this amount. I only want to work the 5 to 10 hours a week that it would really take, or 2 to 3 months a year that it would actually take to produce the necessities. We close off that option. And one of the ways that we've used to close off that option is by conceding no power to the least advantaged individuals among us. And that's really most of the 99%. Some of us might be doing really well, but if we don't keep working, we don't keep that full-time job that we have. We don't keep that job. Eventually, we're going to lose our house. We're going to lose everything we have and go down. We work at these jobs because we have to. And that reduces our leverage, our ability to command a share in the automation that we're all helping to create every time we work. And our inability, it also helps make it impossible for us to demand compensation for the environmental damage that has burdened us. And we actually have to keep demanding more jobs, more work, more labor, more using up of our resources just to keep ourselves alive, because we have been put in this position. And this position was artificially created. And the historical documentation of that is enormous. Was it artificially created to put most of us in that position where we had to be wage laborers. And I have written a book on this, The Prehistory of Private Property. So you can see that from my sources. And these opportunities, I think the fact that given the way we've organized our labor market, these opportunities that really are available to us as a society, which are not, but since we've denied them to the vast majority of people, the possibility to choose working very little and still having our needs met. We have created a situation where I think, you know how they say drowning doesn't look like drowning, doesn't look like you think it will. Well, I think automation doesn't look like automation. It doesn't look like what you think automation will look like. Keynes 100 years ago thought he'd seen the hours that the typical laborer worked in wage labor over the last several decades before he was writing. He saw that decreasing. He just thought that would keep it decreasing. He didn't see the change in our system that would stop that. And then in Robert Theobald in the 1960s said, well, it's actually going to be increasing unemployment. And people are still saying that 60 years later. We haven't seen either one of those things. But what we have seen is increased inequality and increased precarity. And I think that's actually what you should expect. If people's jobs are being automated away, but the only way to keep themselves alive and meet the conditions of a welfare system that will only support them if they can prove if they can get a job or prove that they're unable to work. In that system, people will continually bid down the wages for the worst jobs. They'll eventually find a job, but they're creating these low-level employment opportunities that keep on working at these jobs that don't necessarily need to be done. That and the jobs are increasingly precarious. This job might go out, that job might go out, this other one. You start to build up here. You got your new Uber job, and then suddenly that's gone for either they've lowered the pay or they've replaced you with a self-driving car or something. But we get this sort of precarity from our automation when we're looking for an increase in unemployment, when we should actually be looking for an increase in inequality, and that we have witnessed over the last 50 years.
I think that connects very well to what we've been discussing here actually yesterday. That many people go to work, are unhappy with their jobs, so that they can earn money to compensate their unhappiness with consuming things they don't really need. Generally, we have no questions yet online. I don't see any hands here. Raise your hands if you have questions. I would have just a very short one for now. Yes, thank you. Connected to what you were just explaining. So you said sometimes that talked about jobs that society needs and talked about also what people's relation to their jobs is. I guess probably not in this room, but for many people that might be a contradiction, and that's what often leads to this argument. Oh yeah, but if people basic income, nobody would collect the garbage or whatever. So often this is portrayed as a contradiction, but I think, you touched this a little bit, but I guess it doesn't go, is it not clear to say that this is not what society needs? So the situation we have now where people are forced to do jobs they don't necessarily like, or more time than they would like to, that's not what society needs. That's basically part of a kind of class warfare top down. That's a very small part of society that needs this system.
Well, the idea that we can't have basic income so no one would pick up the garbage. Think about what that means. What a horrible thing someone is saying when they say that. What I don't pick up garbage. Most of the people who say that don't pick up garbage, or they aren't janitors in meat packing plants or do all the other really low paid, low status, poor working conditions jobs in the world. You're saying that what we need is a class of people who have no other option but to do what we tell them. That's how we get these jobs done. That's what we need to do to get these jobs done. And it's right for us to do that. It seems like there are two other options. If they're this horribly unpleasant job that that no one will do unless they're forced, maybe we ought to be sharing those jobs out rather than picking out one class of people who, because they weren't born to somebody with lots of advantages, they have to spend their lives doing the crap for us because we give them no other choice. They can't get access to the resources of the world that would keep them alive unless they do this for us. That is a horrible way to treat some group of people in your society. We could share them out. We could all do a share of these jobs. Or we could rely on really one of the oldest principles in the market economy. Everyone has their price. If you want somebody to pick up the garbage and do the janitorial work in a meatpacking plant, so it's considered one of the worst jobs in the United States, then pay them enough that they will want to do it. If you really need it done, if it's something that really needs to be done, you will pay enough to make somebody want to do it, or maybe you don't really need it. Yeah, if you paid people 150,000 euros a year, yeah, they'll pick up the garbage. If you don't want to pay, and maybe they'll do it for half that, I don't know what it takes, but if you won't pay that, then you probably really don't need it done.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a lot of questions from men here. We have one question from also online. So far, many men been talking. Is that the show of hand, Jitka? Or?
Sorry?
Do you have a question? Or?
Yeah, I would like to. Yeah,
yeah. So I would prefer to give the floor to women first, because we have many men talking here so far.
Thank you. Is it working? Yeah, fine. I love this argument about garbage. Really, because like what we are doing now in this economical system is that we actually, produce a lot of garbage. We have this things overproduced we don't need in the quantity, and lots of new things are just, turned into the garbage very quickly. And yeah, we are not actually treating things economically, even when it's called economy. And so there's lots of garbage. Then we don't, then treat the garbage ethically, morally, correctly, because, also the garbage is actually commodified. It's good job, like good money to use the garbage as the commodity. And so if we think about like the change of the economical system by UBI, then we have lots of changes, actually, not only chances, like how to treat garbage. I would like, Karl, if you could maybe like think loudly about like what could happen actually with the garbage policy as well. I mean, now it's really a lousy job, to work with the garbage because the conditions are terrible. Mm-hmm. But also, like, I believe, like, when we make technologies to work for the better good, for like actually, do the social good, because we can have the consensus, then we can negotiate about what's good for the society where everyone can participate because they are like they have their issues satisfied by UBI, then we can all talk about like what is good for us. So if you think this way, like how actually like disposing of garbage could look like, or also how the garbage itself could look like, using like the technologies to work it out. How actually, like, would that necessarily be a lousy job anymore?
No, I have a mic. Yeah, that's a really good point, because when I was looking at the guy, I was just kind of assuming the amount of garbage is fixed. But actually the amount of garbage is not fixed, and we have a bunch of really horrible policies that create so much garbage that we don't really have to create. We do not make the people who produce plastics pay the environmental cost of plastics. All these disposable items that didn't exist in the middle of the 20th century, that we produce, and we just all gotten used to. You use it once, you throw it out. It is in a landfill for the next 100,000 years, whatever it takes for this type of plastic to photodegrade. The producers of all this packaging and many other things like it pay only the cost of producing it. They pay nothing for the environmental cost, not to mention the human cost for the garbage people to come and pick it up, and the other people to bury it. All of those things, they don't pay at all. So we're really overproducing garbage. So one solution, we need to make garbage more expensive by taxing the crap that becomes garbage, and also by paying our garbage collectors a decent wage. And really, the payment of the garbage collectors is a small portion of that to getting the garbage down. I think that's a really good point. A lot of the stuff we do is just really wasteful because we let companies, and indirectly the consumers that consume from those companies, but we let them produce things in horribly wasteful ways and don't make them pay for the cost that imposes on the entire human species, and well, all the other species.
We have a question. I didn't expect this morning to hear Karl doing trash talk, or meeting, but it's very interesting. And we have a question from the online audience on this, from a gentleman who already tried to ask a question yesterday and was not heard. So, it connects very well, I think, to what you just said. So the question is, how do you reflect the productivist myth? Is UBI a solution for increasing automatization, or part of an anti-productivist policy for you?
Well, UBI, it's just a policy. It can be different things to different people. It can be different things in different contexts. I don't think it's inherently tied to anything like that. But I also think we have to realize that we are killing the environment that sustains us. We've already something like what over 90% of the mammal species are gone. Well, 90% of the mammals, actually, it's often across species. So the actual decline in numbers of each species is much greater than the loss of species. And the loss of habitat, because we're plowing that up, the acidification of the oceans, the plastics in our environment that animals are eating and then starving to death because they can't fit anything else in their stomachs. All of these things, actually, a lot of these things make global climate change, as horrible as it is, look relatively small. Not to mention nuclear power, which, if it works perfectly, is the cleanest energy there is. But if it doesn't work perfectly, it could end all life on this planet. I don't know, Murphy's Law, maybe it's true, maybe, we've got to change this stuff, whether that means we all got to consume less or we all got to consume smarter. I don't know. If we could going to a more environmentally friendly economic system doesn't mean that all of the drinks that we get in plastic containers will go away, but we'll have them in better containers. Things that can be such as ceramics and glass, things that you take from the land and you can put back into the land in an equally usable form, unlike plastic where you put it into a form that's really harmful to everything.
Thank you. So we have some more questions.
I don't think I fully answered that person's question. I guess is that, but I don't see. I guess I would say I don't see. A lot of people will say, well, basic income will make us less consumerist because it lets us live without working and going on this treadmill of work, consume, work, consume. Well, it creates that opportunity, but it also creates opportunity for people at the low end of the income spectrum, which could be 40, 50, 60% of the people in a well-structured UBI. increases their opportunity to consume if they do everything else the same. And so I don't see basic income itself as something that's necessarily going to reduce our consumption of harmful stuff. But I do see it as being part of a strategy where what we need, I think, is taxes and fees on environmental harmful activity. And you take that money out of the economy there, but you put it back in the form of basic income. And then what you're doing when you do that is you're making everything that's environmentally damaging more expensive, relatively speaking. And then you're making everything that is environmentally friendly less expensive. So you're getting a shift in consumption without necessarily a decline or a drag on the macroeconomic labor market. But the prime driver, the environmental driver in that story I just told is from the taxes, not from the UBI. The UBI just merely keeps that from being an enormous drag on the economy.
Thank you.
Yes. Just before the next question, I would like to say that we have also about 15 participants in Zoom room, but they have all turned off the cameras. But maybe online, if you can hear me, it would be nice if you turn the cameras on so we could see you too. Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think this idea you voiced, Karl, is quite popular with yeah, few of us. We have some more questions in the room here. So Branko and then Marek and then Andra. Turn it on.
Hello?
Yep.
It's better.
Yeah.
I have this Karl says we have to do less and or smarter. No, we have to spend less and smarter. But the question is for the man of BIP from the pirates. In Slovenia, the pirates were very active.
Speaking the micro. Branko, you have to hold the micro too close. Yes.
It's better. In Slovenia, the pirates were very active in supporting UBI, unconditional basic income. So now I have a question. Is there any possibility that the European Parliament should, in the next legislation, really discuss UBI? What do you think?
Well, what you should know about the European Union, and now I'm going to talk about the budgets. When there is a normal like member states of the European Union, like Czech Republic, for example, or Germany, usually the amount of money that is tax from the economy and uses for like its expenses is somewhere between 35% and let's say 45% of GDP. That's kind of like the, let's say, normal ratio what is common in the contemporary Europe. When it comes to the European Union, it actually, or through the budget of the European Union, only about 1.4% of its GDP is going through. So just understand the budgets of or the public budgets we have in Europe is in the way that there are huge budgets or of the member states, while very thin layer on top of that, which is the European Union budget. And I mean, like when we are talking about UBI, we are of course like talking about like the expenses that will arise in the public budgets. And obviously this would have to, at least under current circumstances, it would have to appear on the, let's say, national budgets. I mean, of course, when talking about unconditional basic income, always the question arises, should one of the member states kind of like introduce that, maybe the people will consider that to be sort of like a paradise and will start moving over there, overburdening that particular country. So maybe what is probably needed to be done is, of course, I mean, like introduction of the UBI on the European scale, which means like all the member states should do it more or less like synchronously to avoid this effect. But of course, I mean, under current circumstances, it would have to be introduced like from the, let's say, national budgets. I mean, the discussion would probably end up in something a little bit similar, like we are now discussing in the context of the European minimum wage. It is not going to be set one single value for European minimum wage in all Europe, which would apply for both Bulgaria and Luxembourg. But we are rather going into sort of like a process that should in each of the member states establish a decent minimum wage independently. But I mean, like we are talking that on the level of the European Parliament.
This is my question. Of course, the states, the member states have to decide for themselves, but is there any possibility that the European Union will support these states which will decide? Well, Switzerland is not in the part of the it's not the part of the European Union, but it's near, and they had in 2013 they had the referendum about the UBI. It's failed. They planned another Anno Schmidt, I think, is the man, and so on. But UBI is a political decision. This has nothing to do with money. This is the decision how we want to live, to create our personal living, surviving. And so money is just a tool to enable this. And this was the question. Is there any discussions in the European Parliament about possibilities that some state, Czechia, Finland, Estonia, Slovenia, so on, my opinion is smaller countries. It's difficult to implement the first time in Germany. It's too much.
Sorry, then I misunderstood the original question. Well, practically speaking, the European Parliament is kind of like structured. There are like forces, I would say, from the far left to the far right and all in between, everything represented. I mean, when talking about this particular thing, I mean, you could probably consider there are not many people trying to initiate it, because obviously under current circumstances, there is no majority to actually have really like move forward in that direction. I mean, should I be try to kind of like assess it? I think there is a good chance that we would get some support from, let's say, the groups which are currently called the left, maybe the Greens, maybe the Social Democrats. But this is not even like the majority. Of course, there are theoretical discussions ongoing within each of the, let's say, political parties. But obviously, I mean, like, it's not going to happen by with the current, let's say, ideological setting, which applies at least till 2024, when there will be another European election. What would be interesting, and what was actually an interesting discussion at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, or there was actually a clear like understanding that there is a major like damage to the European economy, and under such circumstances, a lot of people actually understood that we really need to stimulate the demand by means of like providing, so to say, helicopter money. So that was probably one of the particular like points of time when it technically was possible to start a discussion and move a bit forward. The problem is that usually, I mean, like European Parliament is a bit special in the sense that it has no like power to initiate legislation. I mean, like this is different from most of the national parliaments, which can do so. And in the European on the European level, should some legislation be initiated, it has to be done by the European Commission, which basically like acts as the European government. And I mean, like when talking about it, I mean, like the people who are like driving the European Commission, and now I'm talking about like German conservatives who actually have the Commission president, but also other influential figures. They are not really like big fans to the of the UBI, to be honest. So like just to summarize that, maybe we had this particular point of time when it was possible to discuss something like that, but the problem is that I don't think it's the last point of the time when we come to this discussion, because well, hopefully COVID was rather an exception than a rule, but at least like from the last decade, I have the feeling that we are going from one crisis to another crisis. So I would be surprised, shouldn't we have in next 5 years another crisis, which would again like trigger this discussion. Yeah. Well, sorry, our job is to kind of like resolve the crisis, not to create crisis. The crises that are ongoing. It's not part of the plan.
Thank you. I think the picture altogether is probably not that bleak, especially when we come back what Karl suggested before, this idea of taxing environmental pollution and then redistributing it. I mean, that is actually something that is just discussed with the ETS, the carbon credit reform right now on European level. So this is actually something that could happen on European level, or that is happening actually in some member states. In Germany, it's, for example, being discussed, this kind of carbon or energy tax that then is paid out as dividend to everybody.
If I may add, of course, we are having a discussion to actually provide sort of like own resources for the European Union, introduce taxes. I mean, like you have probably heard about the plastic tax and so on. The problem we currently have in the institutional setting of the European Union, which is basically like blocking this whole discussion, is the unanimity in the Council. I mean, like most likely people have heard, I just need to repeat it. Because usually the European Union decides by co-decision of the European Parliament and the Council of the Member States, or actually it applies to most of the decision. The European Parliament, it votes on the proposals, and you need a majority for a vote to be approved. In the Council, usually for most of the topics, there is a vote. However, there are two big exceptions. One of them is the foreign policy, and the other one are the taxes. For those two, actually, whatever is decided, it has to be approved by all the member states in the European Union unanimously. So each of the member states can easily kind of like block the decision by saying, no, we are not going with. Which in practice makes the whole discussion regarding the tax reform super complicated, because yeah, let's be politically incorrect. There are tax havens within the EU, and I'm not saying anything against Cyprus, Ireland, and Luxembourg, but yes, I'm talking about you, Cyprus, Ireland, and Luxembourg, and we need to resolve this issue, because I mean, like just blocking all the others when they are willing to move forward, it's not really a fair solution. So we need to move on this unanimity issue, because otherwise any tax reform or any like economical reform of the EU is super complicated and we are not moving forward. And that's why we are also hindered in this discussion about like how to tax the environmental damage.
While we are moving a little bit away from our original topic, I'm very grateful to you to explain why we will later in the General Assembly make the proposal of having a very close eye on the upcoming, hopefully upcoming treaty change process that the European Parliament has now initiated based on the outcome of the Conference on the Future of Europe, which where one of the demands is actually, for example, changing this unanimity requirement. So while the stretch might be not so easy for everybody to understand why this is important for UBI campaigners to look closely. Yeah, I'm very grateful for making this point. Sorry, we are a little bit running out of the time that we have planned for this discussion, and there were still some questions. So I would go for a final round of questions, and then yeah, giving Karl the opportunity to answer them. So Marek was still.
Thank you for your illuminating talk, Karl. I appreciate it. I have a question on automation in relation to financing basic income in the absolute terms. Why to think about that in the absolute terms? I think that automation can be one of resources of financing basic income, but not the financial resource of financing basic income. If you look at that from the democratic point of view, various countries decided to do various things. You mentioned in one of your answers to questions that there are various contexts. So in some countries, they can decide that they can work less, and in other countries, they will work more, and they will use automation and taxing robots in different ways. So, for example, even if we are pretty developed in Western countries, in the US, there is nothing like universal public healthcare, for example, if you compare it with the European Union countries, right? So even now there are differences, and in the future, I think it could be similar how to use automation concerning financing basic income. So I would say it's one of possible resources. Second, because your lecture was about arguments, so I would ask you about historical arguments. Of course, it's very important to analyze historical trajectories, how it developed from there to here and how it can go to the future. But many times people said, oh, I mean, in the past, they said there was no democracy in the past, so we can't introduce democracy. It never happened in the past. So, and when we say, for example, we can't use automation too much because previous technologies in the history were never used for reduction of work too much, etc. That can be also misused against the introduction of basic income. People can say, oh, there was nothing like basic income at the national level at the European Union countries, so it will never be introduced in the future. So I would be cautious how to use these historical arguments. And as I say, it's important to see historical trajectories, and we could see how it can develop in the future. And the experts who analyze future, they always look at various scenarios, not just one way, but several scenarios of the future. And we can think in the same way how to use automation in several scenarios and to expect that various countries can use it in different ways. But still, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Karl, before you answer, maybe let's collect. Is it okay? Okay, the remaining.
Okay, I better take notes then.
Sorry.
Go on.
I have two questions, one for Mr. Widerquist and one for Mr. Peksa, of course. You were talking about discrediting the movement by the future-based arguments. So my question would be, do you also think about discrediting the movement because it's actually a civic movement in the context that civic movements should claim the rights of someone. It should demand something that is someone's right, not just putting it as an inevitability of the future and wait. Is it the point of your argument? And the one for Mr. Peksa, you mentioned the accumulation of power and data in few companies. Do you see on European level, do you see there the reflection on it? And what will be the chances of public policies, for example, of institutions such as European Commission and Union, to compete with the sheer power of capital and data they hold? Is the public policy strong enough in this? Thank you.
Okay. I see from your question, Merrick, I see I haven't made myself well understood. You said something about that I suggested taxing automation to finance UBI. I said nothing of the kind. I don't. I didn't say in my talk anything about how to finance UBI. There's plenty of wealth out there in a lot of ways you can tax it. You can have a wealth tax, a rent tax, a resource tax, income tax, VAT. There's all kinds of ways you can get it at the wealth that's out there. I didn't really get into that issue at all. Now, when I answered a question, there was I answered something about a pollution tax finance UBI. That was just simply to illustrate that it's not the UBI that is necessarily discouraging wasteful resource consumption. It is the taxes. The UBI is merely to counteract some of the side effects of those taxes. So that's as close as I got to really talking about financing. So no, I'm not saying we should tax the automation. And I think that's a bad way, because when you tax something, you discourage something. You should be taxing things you want to discourage, such as using up, or simply using up resources, or taking resources off the market for speculative reasons. Those kind of things you definitely want to tax. But AI advancement. Then the other. I was only halfway taking notes by the time I'll get around. So I'm not recalling. What was the last part of your question? Oh, but one of the points of this, again, I've had a hard time making myself understood. One of my points that I made in the argument is just because it has always happened that way doesn't mean that it always will happen that way. What I talked about when I was talking about discrediting the movement was this is a movement based on a prediction of what's going to happen in the future. And if that prediction doesn't come true, you discredit yourself. Various religions have talked their way around that. Oh, the end of the world for the Seventh-day Adventists was supposed to be in 1850 or something, and they keep updating it. But I don't think that's going to work so well for us. So I don't want, what I'm saying is, don't base it on a future prediction of something you think is about to happen. I'm talking about things that are happening here and now, and that lead me to the conclusion basic income is long overdue. I didn't understand your question about civic engagement.
I was trying to point out that.
Sorry.
I was trying to ask you if by discrediting, you can also mean that once it's a civic movement, it's here to claim someone's right. Like UBI is actually a civic movement. So we shouldn't tackle the topic as an inevitability, which has to come in the future, and just wait, because the means or the DNA of civic movement is just to claim something that is missing, and it's the right of someone.
Yes.
So the approach is important. Like,
yes.
Why have even civic movement if you just say this has to come and we will wait here, which I thought was something you criticized. So
oh, yeah. Oh, so you're agreeing with me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I agree.
Thanks.
I agree with your agreement of me. Yes.
Okay. And that was, I think, you had a question to no, Jitka, sorry, we are absolutely out of time. No, really, we have to wrap up. I think there was a question to you, if you want to answer.
Yes, I will try to be brief, but it's a bit complicated.
Yes.
There is of course a way how to approach the problem of concentration of data. You should promote two principles, or actually there are two approaches. One of them is that one that is being used by the European Union, or like the mainstream of the European Union, and that's simply attempt to regulate the existing monopolies we have. I mean, that's why the so-called Digital Services Act was created. These are basically like rules for Google, Facebook, and those big platforms, how they should behave so that everything is fine. And it's just like trying to mitigate the damage. What should happen from my point of view, and what is not definitely not enough promoted, are the ideas of open data and decentralization. Basically, the open data is the shift from like a company owns the data to and keeps it for itself, to, let's say, the data are public, shared by everybody, and everybody can use it. I mean, like, you can understand the difference. Like, well, we could have each of us a clock on our hand, or there could be clock somewhere on the wall, and everybody would see it. I mean, like, that's the difference. And of course, like, the second solution is probably better, because then you did not need to buy the watch. Then also, like, the decentralization. I mean, like, I think I would promote a little bit the Mastodon. Of course, we can all be like disappointed about the fact that all the data of Facebook are being stored somewhere in the servers of Mark Zuckerberg. Of course, it's disappointing. But there could be a different business model, because there is a social network which basically works that way, that you can set up your own server and become small Mark Zuckerberg, but just for some of your, let's say, customers or users. And you are not separate from all the others. You are connected with the other nodes in a similar way like the emails are. So there is a network of, let's say, small Facebooks which are interconnected to each other and working together, like showing the posts from the other nodes and so on. So the system itself is decentralized, and you have much bigger control over the data than you had previously, when everything was under the control of the big multinational. And of course, what we should do is try to shift from the centralized models to the decentralized model and try to enforce it by the specific, like, data laws, which is so far being definitely promoted by us, but there is quite few understanding, especially among, let's say, the big groups or some major, like, industrial connected players, like, for example, the French ruling party. They are very much strong on, like, let's centralize everything. So there is, let's say, a struggle between those two approaches.
Thank you very much. I really hate to kill the discussion here. We have a very ambitious plan scheduled for today, and we are already 25 minutes behind this plan. But yes, thank you, Karl Widerquist. Thank you, Mikuláš Peksa, for this very interesting thoughts, insights, and thank you, everybody, for joining the discussion. And yeah, we have to now move on to our next agenda point, which is actually the General Assembly of Unconditional Basic Income Europe. So, but before we do that, yes. Thanks.